like to call the workshop, let's see, hold on. There we go. Our ship is here.
Oh, I thought you said something else.
I'd like to call the work session to order for March 6, 2023. City Clerk, please read the roll. Councilmember Stipp isn't with us tonight, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Correct.
All right, we have one item on the agenda. We're going to hear from the overview and update on Rio Reimagine program. Go ahead and introduce yourself and start.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Christian Williams, Principal Planner here, and I'm here with Cecilia Revere with Arizona State University. She's a director there with the University City Exchange Program, and she's here tonight on behalf of Rio Reimagine to give you a program collaborative update.
Great, thanks, Christian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm here on behalf of ASU, but also on behalf of a large partnership of public, private, nonprofit, community-based organizations here in the Valley, including the City of Goodyear. And we have been working over the last 5 or 6 years on a large-scale urban design project, which is to revitalize the Salton Gila River corridor that transects the valley. So today I thought I would give you just a quick overview, and we're really focused today on a specific item, as you can see in your agenda, which is for the City of Goodyear to participate in a co-share, co-managed leadership position, someone that would be hired to support the work of the Rio. Do I advance the slide here?
Yes.
Great. Okay, thanks. So I'm just going to bring you up to speed a little bit on the Rio. I have been before the West Valley mayors and managers, but I'm not sure that I've been here in front of Rio. Your talented staff, I'm sure, has briefed you on Rio in the past. But as I say, this is a large-scale urban design initiative that involves 6 cities, 2 tribal nations, Maricopa County, a number of state agencies, federal agencies, and numerous nonprofit agencies. It is a vast 55-mile plus corridor, and this is really for 1 to 2 miles on both sides of the banks of the river. So it's not necessarily just the corridor itself, but those neighborhoods and development areas on both the north and south banks. Major differences in hydrology, different priorities per city. So you have things that are happening in the east side of the valley that are strong priorities, as opposed to central or even the western reach here near Goodyear, and a very diverse land ownership along the corridor. So you have public lands, private lands, some major legacy industries, of course, in the river corridor that have supported our construction industry for many, many decades. And you have leadership in the Rio that represents multiple sectors, as I've described: public agencies, private sector, corporate engagement, nonprofits, etc. These are the large-scale project aspirations that were determined by the partnership, reconnecting the community to the river. Of course, we have tribal land stewardship that has been provided by the Pipash and Akimo Otham tribes over the centuries, and we are reconnecting these communities to the river corridor through recreation, economic development, of course, the environmental ecosystem values that it represents. We're looking at establishing a metropolitan vision. How could this be something that is akin to a San Antonio River Walk, if you will, that has a number of different reaches of the river? As you know, if you're familiar with San Antonio, you have a large-scale economic development in the core of that project. You also have a mission reach, which is celebrating the cultural values and of those missions. You have a museum reach, which is the arts segment, etc. So what does the Rio look like for us here in the Valley? That has yet to be determined. We don't have a master plan at this point. This is probably multi-decades to come in terms of cities determining what works for them along the Rio, but great opportunity for economic growth, inclusion of the next generation of leaders. What would they like with respect to the river corridor, and how can we plan sustainably for the future based on population growth, based on a warming environment here in the valley, etc. So Our federal engagement to date, I'll go into this in a minute, but what is really, with respect to the Rio, been very important over the last few years, we've only been at this about 5 years, we have ongoing grants and assistance. So once we started the Rio and established some strong federal relationships, not to mention the federal agencies that are land managers and own parcels near the corridor, but they started taking a look at how they could support the work here. This slide shows a little bit of diversity in terms of how their investment is turning into on-the-ground projects for communities, from urban forestry to brownfields assessment and cleanup to water quality studies that are ongoing with the U.S. Geological Survey, environmental justice in Mesa. We have a grant where we're doing environmental education and literacy across the corridor with a number of nonprofit partners. And then most recently, of course, the announcement of the RAISE grant through Department of Transportation, which is a $25 million bridge to the city of Phoenix at 3rd Street. So right in the middle of the corridor, which will connect the South Central Phoenix community to the Rio Salado Habitat Wildlife Area on the North Bank and provide a lighted pathway of bike and pedestrian trails through that corridor. We've had a number of cabinet members visit throughout the last 5 years. We've had 2 EPA administrators. We've had Secretary of the Interior. Of course, Secretary Buttigieg was the announcement last fall of the bridge. The cabinet and the administration, both this administration and last administration, are very cognizant of the Rio. We had 100% support from our delegation for the state of Arizona for a federal nomination of the Rio to be part of a federal program, but it goes without saying that there's interest, there's support here for the corridor. I should say, of that $27 million that I talked about before, these grants are coming direct to the partners. ASU is not engaged in any kind of work other than to serve as a catalyst for this grant funding. We're writing grants. The funding is coming direct to the cities, direct to those nonprofit organizations that have the projects in the corridor. So, current activities I've described here, a brownfield coalition that is made up of the 3 cities, Phoenix, Tempe, and Avondale. They took a look at certain parcels along the river that had contamination. They're doing assessment on that and then eventual cleanup. They have $1.5 million to put out to the community for redevelopment of those parcels. This is just the first of our coalition grants. And so a Goodyear would have an opportunity to join the coalition and apply for grant funding through a very strong relationship with the EPA. You'll see down at the bottom there project priorities. These are very active priorities for the communities. City of Phoenix is putting forward a bond this fall to purchase parcels along its corridor because the development interest in the Rio in Phoenix is so strong that there is a lack of control with respect to how those parcels should be repurposed there along the Rio. And so Phoenix has said, look, let's at least pick up a couple very strategic parcels here. We can work with the community on what this should be moving forward. What are the community's priorities? They're, of course, supportive of development community and their interest in the Rio, but want a little bit more skin in the game on some of these key parcels. You're seeing redevelopment of the trailhead for Phoenix at 91st Avenue. That's a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project. They're looking at restoring a 13-mile segment of the City of Phoenix Reach. This is similar to their work at Rio Salado Wildlife Habitat area, where they're taking out invasive species and planting native plants, habitat support there for important bird areas, etc. This speaks to a major concern here in the West Valley of removing invasive species, planting native plants, and avoiding a definite fire risk within this West Valley. There's grant funding available, and Phoenix is taking a look at doing that in their reach. Bloomberg Associates is working with City of Phoenix, again, on this kind of urban plan for their reach. You see there the West Valley El Rio Confluence Lake. This was a concept plan, of course, that Maricopa County put forward a few years back, still kind of on the shelf as a concept. We're doing quite a bit of restoration work here in the West Valley with the State Department of Forestry and Fire Management. So a number of projects throughout the West Corridor to remove those invasive species. That's state funding through the U.S. Forest Service, so it is federal funding. Tempe just went through a major vegetation management project to thin out their section of the corridor. In so doing, is facing a major unsheltered population in their reach of the Rio. They were coordinating with probably a dozen different social service agencies to provide services to those unsheltered, and they're still in the middle of that project. And then lastly, the Audubon Center at Central Avenue has some private sector funds to do a major pollinator garden there along the Rio, and quite a bit of community engagement from South Central Collaborative. This is the Confluence Lake I mentioned before. You have seen probably a presentation on this, and certainly an opportunity there with the partners on the left of the Buckeye Water Conservation District and Avondale. Of course, flood control has been the point on that feasibility study. The Lower Gila River Collaborative, you've heard, is our western reach of the Rio. This is a very active advocate for ecosystem restoration in the western reach of the Rio. Christian and very talented staff at Goodyear are very involved with Lower Gila River Collaborative. There's federal funding that we're taking a look at for trail connectivity. We have a strong partner in Maricopa County Parks and Rec Department doing restoration work, parks plantings. We have a water quality study right now in the corridor related to recreation and restoration work. We've connected with MAG and ADOT on State Route 30. What are some freeway mitigation funds that could be utilized for bike and pedestrian access along the 30. We've connected to Arizona Rock Products Association to connect to their priorities and parcels within the corridor that are perhaps at the end of their life cycle. And they've been very responsive to the collaborative. And then lastly, we went through a whole workshop series at the end of 2022 to connect with the ag community and others in neighborhoods to find out what their priorities are for the river corridor here in the West Valley. A couple of community events. We're out at, Urban Wildlife Conservation Day was in October. This is a separate designation by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that we are a conservation partnership that needs support because we are dedicated to habitat and species that the Fish and Wildlife Service is trying to support. They're very active in that particular event. We've done workshops, pilot projects to install litter mitigation at various stormwater outlet channels, river cleanups, etc. Today is really also focused on a new leader that would be dedicated to this Urban Waters Federal Partnership. And this is the program at the federal level that has 15 different federal agencies, many of whom I've talked about already today, that partner with 28 national nonprofits. They are dedicated to communities with urban waterways, and this would be a position that is full-time, that is looking to match our local needs to those resources. Not just from the federal government and those agencies, but also the national nonprofits, a whole learning network of different locations across the country. And we pulled together a team of representatives from the cities, county, state, nonprofits, and said, how could we get this done? How could we have a full-time regional leader for the Rio that's bringing in these resources to the valley? They proposed a co-share model where we have federal funds already pledged to us from the EPA, and we take a local co-share, so a small amount of money from the different cities, tribes, SRP, ASU, and we put it all together to hire a local liaison to this federal program, a strategic leader to solicit, apply for, possibly manage these grants, and then someone who can kind of convene and facilitate on behalf of the region. These are the stakeholders that I've just described here. It's $15,000 for 4 years. We figured if we're going to hire somebody, we should have something of a runway for them to secure grants. And most federal grants are anywhere from 2, 3, 5, 3-year grants. So you want to make sure you have enough time here for this individual to be securing them. You see there at the very bottom, Maricopa Association of Governments, MAG, will be housing this individual. They will provide in-kind contributions for the management and back office support, if you will, of this individual. And the rest of these entities have been asked to provide $15,000 for 4 years. Gila River Indian Community is pending. They've had staff changes. They have a new director of environmental quality who has been hired, and we will be circling back with them on this opportunity. They are a signatory of the Rio Reimagined, and we have had strong support from Governor Lewis to date. Moving forward, I think we're going to wrap up with this slide. We had an IGA, an intergovernmental agreement, that was circulated to all the signatories. Legal staff provided edits, input, and has now been approved, if you will, at the staff level. This is a document that does what I've just described on the slides. It establishes a co-share model and an ability for each of these funders, including the City of Goodyear, to have a staff person that would be on an advisory council, managing the scope of work of the ambassador on an annual basis. In addition, performance metrics for the ambassador, and we're looking if all the councils approve, and we're pretty much at 60% now of all councils having taken a look at this. Avondale's also looking at this tonight on their agenda, that we would begin a hiring process in Q2. So we would possibly have somebody on board, hired, and starting by July of this year. Ongoing grants, funding, public outreach, engagement. There is a group also, you'll see at the bottom of the slide, that is looking at putting together a new 501c3 that's dedicated to the Rio. When we started this about 5-6 years ago, we went out to the nonprofits and foundations and the scope of the Rio, which includes recreation, economic development, ecosystem restoration, housing, health services, et cetera, was beyond any existing nonprofit's scope of work. And ASU kind of has stayed at the helm here, but Greater Phoenix leadership and the Pulliam Trust have said this is worth funding, this is worth exploring. So they have started to put together a private sector, essentially Friends of the Rio effort to try to put forward a nonprofit to support this initiative moving forward. This is not uncommon. We've looked at river revitalization projects across the country and also other infrastructure initiatives like the Beltline, the High Line. There's usually a nonprofit entity that survives beyond political cycles, if you will, and has a strong support from with a community base that kind of continues the work moving forward. So that's in early stages. It has not been filed yet, and it's in exploratory stage right now. That's our last slide. This initiative started with former Senator John McCain. It was built most recently on the incredible foundational work of U.S. Congressman Pastor, and we hope to, continue the work moving forward. It's a multi-decade initiative. We feel like we're just barely scratching the surface right now with lots of opportunity. So, thank you very much.
I'll tell you what, I'll open up for some questions here. Anybody want to start? Vicki?
Was that $15,000 for 4 years or $15,000 a year for 4 years?
Thank you. It's $15,000 a year for 4 years.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you, council member.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Sherry.
This is on or off?
You're on.
Thank you very much for bringing this forward. I think it's a great project. I remember a year or a couple years ago when they brought us back, some of the visionary and the possible planning and everything about our area would have the ability to have recreation, economic development. We're kind of untouched between us, Avondale, and Buckeye. So I think it's a great plan. I think it's very well worth the money. It's an investment in our future here in Goodyear, and I assume our neighbors will see it the same way because we're all kind of close together. I'd like a lake. I like the recreation. I love those lakes. I'd like to move a little over also on the other side of the river, but other side of the bridge. But I love the idea where it's going. I think this is a really good, strong investment. And I think if we do this now, we'll set up ourselves very good for the future, because we'll have the planning for the future, so we won't have this like mishmash. I don't know if this is something we would be looking at, what Phoenix is doing, since we still are on the cusp of a very undeveloped portion, what they're doing, and I don't know if that's something the city management would want to look at as well, about how you said they were buying strategic parcels, what might be best for our city in the future, knowing it's not going to be developed today, next year, but I look at it as a long term. So thank you so much for bringing it, and I do appreciate it. And the parts of the river that have been worked on, love them, and I see a great, vibrant future. So I'm excited for this program.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Vice Mayor.
I really marvel at all the entities that you've gotten together to work on this collaboratively, from the federal to the state and just a myriad of others. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. And so no doubt you do need somebody to kind of coordinate things. Now, are there any other hired staff positions at this time? Okay.
No, thank you for the question, Vice Mayor. At this time, there are no other well, let me just say, 5 to 6 years ago when this began, this phase of this RIO initiative, because of course it started in the 60s, and there have been people doing projects in the corridor for many, many decades. At that time, when Senator McCain came to all the mayors, including Mayor Lord, who was a great champion of this initiative, he also came to ASU, and ASU at that time, 5-6 years ago, hired staff to support the initiative. That was myself and another director, Melissa McCann. So we were pretty much dedicated, although we had other projects at the time. The work of the RIO has been so substantial, and the support of the partners and the needs have been so substantial, we were pretty much 100% dedicated to RIO over the last 5 years. We are continuing in that role because of ASU's charter to take responsibility for the communities it serves. And so we plan to support the community and take the lead from the community in terms of what the project should be, what your priorities are, how can we help you with research, students, et cetera. We have a number of units engaged all through these projects. The ambassador would be the first full-time staff that would be hired in a consultant capacity initially by MAG. So this would not be a MAG, technically a MAG employee. They would be a contract consultant to the partnership that is housed at MAG. And so it is the first. And this IGA is very unusual in that it has IGA language for all the signatories, with the exception of MAG, which has an MOU language in their segment. It's like nothing we've done, and it has taken us 18 months to get this done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like a very big step forward, and as you said, this is a multi-decade project, which I think we're just setting up a good foundation for the legacy to come.
Thank you.
I do like Councilmember Loretano's suggestion for Goodyear to evaluate lands that might be considered for purchase, so that way we would be prepared. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Hampton.
Yeah, thank you. So, a couple of questions. First one is when the 4-year time elapsed, is there another time where you come back and ask for more?
It's
or
possible.
continuation,
It's possible at that time there would be a 501c3 that would have funding and be able to hire and designate a budget for an ambassador at that time. So we see this as a transition where there would be a contribution by the cities and the signatories for the Rio, and it'll be determined after 4 years. And the city would have the option of really taking a look, of course, at the funding and the resources, technical assistance that's been provided in funding this ambassador, and has it been worth it? Have you seen some work here in your corridor, and has been helpful? So I can't tell you what will happen after 4 years, but this is something that is brand new to us. And our idea from hearing about a new nonprofit would be that there would be funding behind that nonprofit and supporting the region. Yeah.
No, I'm really excited about it. I remember when they first came and showed us the 3-lake concept, and which was very exciting at the time as well. So I'm supportive of it, and I wrote that down here that I was excited about potentially land banking, potentially along that area as well. I hope it comes sooner than later, because I'd love for at least my kids to maybe enjoy those lakes in the future.
Yeah.
But so I'm not sure. I know the timeline is decades potentially away, but I don't know if there's a way to get us water sooner than later. But yeah, I'm excited for this area. Obviously, you keep showing photos of Tempe. We'd love to have something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Something like that in Goodyear would be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So and they've done really well with that area and with that amenity there too. So I think John McCain was very visionary in setting this up and looking at it as a holistic thing for that entire river bottom there. But yeah, I'm excited about it. Like I said, I'm very supportive of it, and I'd love to see this come to fruition sooner than later, or in maybe a couple of decades or less. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, we are ready, I think staff knows this, at any time to talk about specific projects, priorities for the Goodyear Reach, and happy to connect to other partners, whether it be at the federal level or national nonprofits. Of course, you have your relationships with City of Phoenix to discuss their strategies and how that could be customized for the Goodyear segment. So, yeah, lots of potential.
Councilmember Campbell?
Thank you. Well, I remember sitting in Senator McCain's office talking about this before it was a reality.
Yes.
And I was at the kickoff meeting when we unveiled what it would look like. And even then, we didn't know what portion Goodyear was going to get. And I don't truthfully recall getting a briefing on the El Rio Confluence Lake. I may be wrong, and I might have missed it, but I don't remember getting it. So I am excited about it because I see the potential. However, I want to be sure that Goodyear isn't left out because we don't really have a river frontage, per se. And I don't want us to be the last afterthought. For some reason, when MAG's involved, the East Valley gets everything, and I don't want us to be the last ones on because of where we're located. But this is really a dream come true for all of, not only the West Valley, but just for all of Arizona, because it is such an economic development driver. And it has a potential of us always being in the forefront of new development. And it's something that people can't envision seeing in the desert. So this will be like the 100th wonder of the world, if it's done. But I'm really excited that you do want to get a professional. It's very hard to get grants, number one. And number two, you've got to have someone totally dedicated to write them, and they have to know where the grants are to go after them. And I think having a 501c3 nonprofit in the head of this is the way to go, because that way you will be able to get more money given to you from not only corporations, but individuals who really want the tax write-off, quite frankly, and can see the dream. And this is like a dream come true to so many people that have envisioned having water in those lakes that we've not had before. So thank you so much, and I hope you'll come back or someone will give us a briefing every so often, just so that we are in the loop, rather than every year get a briefing, because a lot happens in a year. So we would appreciate being on the front burner, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Councilmember.
Thank
Be
you.
happy to do that. I think there's lots to talk about. specifically with the Bullard Wash and connectivity to your recreational corridors and trail system. So I think that would be a great next step, is to get a little bit more down into the details.
Yeah, we need to get in the
of
weeds for us, because
Yep.
we need to figure out what we can do, because we don't
Absolutely.
even know what the possibilities are.
Yep.
And it would be wonderful if we could have maybe even a work session on what are the possibilities, what would Goodyear look like? What can we get, or what could we help build to get? Because it's just something that we don't know that much about.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's definitely doable. We can pull in the realities of where the general plan is with respect to this area, and work that's already happened and what's planned. So
Thank
I
you.
think we can absolutely commit to that.
Thank you, great,
Mm-hmm.
thank you.
Thank you. Do you have something you want to add?
Did the Salt Cedar initiative help out a lot with the, I know you got some federal monies, right, to try to clean out some of the salt cedar, I think at least in the Buckeye area. And
Yeah,
I don't know if
so-
there's more money for that portion or that effort as well.
Yes, thanks for the question, Councilmember. The federal funding came through, there's $10 million available through the Department of Forestry and Fire Management. So yes, there is some good funds there to apply to those specific areas. And right now, we are looking and applying those funds in the West Valley to a number of different sites. So yes, it has been very effective, but lots more to work on.
do, yeah.
It's very costly, you know, even for these small areas, but very strong partners with the county and the state. We have federal partners as well who are doing some of the restoration work. Gila River Indian Community has also been actively doing restoration in the Tres Rios wildlife area. So it's one of these things that the Lower Gila River Collaborative has been taking the lead on, of connecting these areas, these pockets of restoration, and how do we take a look at it at a watershed scale, so that we can really address the fire risk over a vast area. We have other partners in the community that are also proposing. The Buckeye Water Conservation Irrigation District has also taken a look at a scale level restoration initiative. So the funding has been very, very helpful. There's much more needed. Yeah.
Go ahead.
This question's for staff, and you brought up the general plan, and so since the general plan's in discussion now, does it contemplate that would be a future recreation and economic development corridor? Or are we gonna load it all up with industrial, perhaps?
Well, there's strategies, excuse me, there's strategies in the general plan that are being revised right now, but when we think about master planning, we look at the El Rio plan, as well as the Parks, Recs, and Trails and Open Space Master Plan, and those definitely call out that should be a recreational corridor.
Wonderful, thank you.
Well, listen, I also agree with this. I like the plan, I like the visioning. Unfortunately, hopefully my grandkids can enjoy this. My biggest question as we go through here is, I like the idea of possibly, when we do our general plan, looking at land area that we may want to lock down around there to have some control. And the second thing is, being in a desert, I would imagine the biggest challenge is, where's the water coming from? So that's going to be the biggest challenge, to populate this with water, is where do we get it from? So that'd be kind of interesting to see how all that gets populated as we kind of move forward. But I like the recreation area. I like the fact it's that would go through the variety of different cities all the way through. I think it'd be a great amenity for the West Valley and actually for the county, anything this passes through. So I like the idea. I think our biggest challenge would probably be the water.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, one of the conceptions that this is Tempe Town Lake through 55 miles is something we've tried to dispel, but we do know that the partners are interested in nodes of recreation, connected trail systems, open space, green, essentially a large green infrastructure project through the valley. This is a very common design through other river revitalization projects where you have connected trail systems, connected parks, and certainly with our air quality challenges, our urban heat challenges, it makes sense. You have a corridor right now that already has runoff, stormwater into the corridor. You have areas of habitat that should be preserved. And so how do we build on that? You know, how do we take a look at these nodes, what's important, access points, et cetera? So with respect to the water, part of the strategic planning that's been done by the Lower Gila River Collaborative has to do with sources of water, whether it's ag tailwater or storm water, et cetera, and understanding that resource currently and then anticipating what it will be in the future, so it can better inform the decisions for the stakeholders.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the presentation and the update. I think it's a great project, you know, as we kind of go forward. And I think as we, you know, do the plan that we're working on right now, we want to incorporate from economic development, trail settings, and that. So with that, again, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mayor.
And with that, we have a regular meeting following this meeting, but we need about 15 minutes for them to set up in the other room. So it's what, 5:35 now? My math is right, what that make us, what, 5:50? Okay, 5:50 we'll meet in the other room. With that, this meeting's done.